and welcome back to another episode of International Immersion, a podcast that seeks to capture the combined experiences of people, places, culture, traveling, current events, living abroad, and everything that comes along with them, and much, much more. For today's episode, I want to kind of go back to the earlier days of the podcast, talking more about what it's like to travel abroad. And to do so, I want to focus on what you learn when you travel abroad. And to do that, I've actually brought on one of my friends. Her name is Jenny. And between the two of us, we have traveled to a decent number of countries and also have examples of living or staying more long-term in certain countries. So, Jenny, it's great to have you on today.
Thanks for having me. To give you a bit of background, I have lived and traveled throughout Mexico, primarily central Mexico. I've gone to Costa Rica, Puerto Rico. I lived in Buenos Aires, Argentina for a month to study for my master's. And then, like you, I've gone to India.
Very nice, very nice. And you've certainly hit a nice chunk of Latin America in general. And then, and just for everyone's reference, I myself have been to India. I lived in China for 4 years. Been to Nepal, Italy, Germany, the Czech Republic, Austria, and the Netherlands, along with Taiwan. So between the two of us, we've covered a good chunk of the planet. I mean, there's still many more countries, let's face it. But between the two of us, we've hit a lot of places, and I'd say we've gotten some really good knowledge and feedback from our time in these different countries. And I think it's interesting how we may share or may be different in some of our experiences and opinions about the places where we've been. So to do this, we've prepared a list of questions and topics to kind of go into in a general sense, because each of these in of itself could be an entire episode because they're so complex. But anyway, Jenny, to begin with, I think the most important thing that when you travel overseas or outside your home country is what you discover about yourself. Wouldn't you agree?
Yes, I would agree because, you feel like in middle school it's all about figuring out who you are. Maybe come high school graduation, you feel like you figured it out, but then you discover there's this whole big world out there, and you've barely scraped the surface as to what the world has to offer. You just realize, hey, I didn't know this existed, I believe this, or I prefer this, and you just don't know what you're going to learn about yourself still.
No, I completely agree. I think it's that time, like in my own example, the first time I traveled overseas was to China for study abroad. It was a faculty-led program, but I just remember when we landed, I was like, oh, I'm in a different country now. And it was like, okay, but then once you got into the airport and once you got out, and you're like, okay, I'm in a different place. So it's like a whole new take on things, and your mind's like, okay, everything can be new. Everything is just, you're absorbing so much information and so much stimulus. And I find that some people do this better than others, and some people can take away more versus others not so much. But I think it's when you're in a different place, different situations, different people, different influencing factors, that's when you really learn what you can and can't do. And also I think you learn how adventurous or non-adventurous you can be.
That is very true. For example, one thing I learned about myself is that I'm a bit more of a people person than I thought I originally was, just because when I'm abroad, I try to speak the language of that country, and in a way, speaking that language is kind of like a mask, and you're acting, so I'm a little more outgoing, because it's not like me, Jenny, in English doing it, it's like the other Jenny in Spanish or Hebrew or whatever the case might be. So I open up a little bit more.
No, I think that's a great example, and I would definitely reciprocate in that. I would do the same thing, and I think I think it really helps you, because if you're in a different place, and like my example, like when I first went to China, I had been studying Chinese for a bit, but I was still terrible at it. But when I met some people, and would go out and explore, and I tried to use my Chinese, they were so, oh my gosh, he's trying to use it, and they were much more willing to help me and show me, and it really made it more interesting. And I think if you're willing to try to learn and do what the locals do, and show that you appreciate or at least try to understand how things are done there, that'll open so many doors. Versus oh no, I can't do this, I can't do that, I won't eat this, I won't eat that. I've traveled with some people like this, and it's just kind of like, oh Lord.
No, I would agree. And then also, when I went to India, that's the place I was least familiar with before going. I just discovered Bollywood music and the kurtis, the long tunic-like tops that the women wear. I just love those and the colorfulness of it all. I just didn't know that was an option out there.
Oh no, and that's always like dress, food, entertainment, architecture, different all the different buildings, different all the society, the culture, all the different things you see. It can all some places it's not too different. Like if you go to U.S. to Europe, there's a lot of differences, but it's not like
It's not
stark,
huge culture
not a
shock.
huge stark contrast. But if you go from like U.S. to China, it definitely is like, oh, this is different. So that is a very good point you bring up there, and I think based on the person that will determine how much you really discover about yourself. And in many cases, I think the most important thing you have to do, and it's very hard for people, is you have to step outside of your comfort zone.
Yes, that's what I was thinking as well. Is you really have to separate yourself from your American friends if you're traveling with them or travel alone to be able to branch out and discover.
And that's another good point. And I would always say if it's the first time you're going overseas, don't go alone just because it's a new experience. But once you've done it a couple of times or you do it quite successfully, then you can plan to go alone. And I think that will give you a great opportunity because it forces you to adapt and to make use of what you have. And that leads into other topics we'll discuss and opens up even more.
For sure. So what's next on our list?
So the next thing is, I think, from a U.S. perspective, since we're both based in the U.S., is that when you are in another country or you're either in another country short term or long term, you discover that not everything is done in the same way in every place. Like, for example, in the U.S., here in the Midwest in the United States, there are certain ways people do things, there's certain standard of living, lifestyle, methods of transportation, so on and so forth that we all take for granted. We're just like, oh, it's just a normal daily grind. But you realize in places like China, for example, or India, that how people go about their lives and on a day-to-day basis can be very different. So, in other words, you could say what's in the U.S. here is not necessarily the global norm.
Right, and people tend to think that because I don't know, we put ourselves on a pedestal at times, and you think we might be the standard, but we are definitely not. If anything, after traveling to a handful of countries, you'll see that the US tends to be the exception, not the norm to what the rest of the planet does.
Well, and we could do a whole episode about just like the things that foreigners find interesting about the U.S., like for example, ice in drinks and tax being put on after, and all types of things. There's like I've talked to people like, why do you guys do this, or why do you guys do that, or why don't you use metric? Those are all things that it's like, well, it's like it's just how we do things here, in kind of a simple way, in the simple response. But yeah, and it's kind of cool to see how every place has its own way of doing things. Of course, we're all humans. There's all things we're going to do in a similar format. But I think if you take a step back and think about it, you can actually find it quite interesting and insightful. Oh, this is how they do things here. I do this way back home, but they do it this way here. Interesting. Maybe this is better. Maybe that's better, or maybe I can combine the two. Or maybe have more of a fusion perspective. How to maybe take the best of both. Or in other words, like I myself am more of an eclectic. I like to take the best of anything, no matter where it's from, and apply it to my life. So in many cases, whenever I travel overseas, I like to see how people do things, in all capacities, and then just, take some mental notes and bring that back with me. And now it kind of enhances and adds to my perspective on when I'm back in the U.S. here about, oh, this is how I do things here, but I can maybe try this and that from these countries that other people here would have no knowledge of unless they travel there. They may see it on TV or they may see it, in a secondhand perspective or secondhand way, but they're not living it.
Yeah, I agree, and I believe that that's becoming more common as we become a global society, and especially like YouTube videos. People are very curious to see videos from other countries or Americans traveling to other countries, and they start picking up on new ideas that they like to implement now in the US.
Oh no, that's for sure. YouTube is such a great resource for travel blogs, people talking about what they're doing in whatever country or wherever they're at in certain places. It's a great window. I mean, it's still not like actually being there, but it's the next best thing. And I've used YouTube or other people's travel postings to prepare for my own travels, just because you learn about a lot of useful tips and things you can use.
Great. So next, I think we're going to talk about learning the truth when you travel. Tell us what we mean by this, Sean.
Yeah. So global media and news, they always report on things, especially the sensational things. So I find that how you view a country or a place, if you never go to it and you just rely on what you see on the news or social media, it's not always the same as if you actually go there. Like, for example, before I went to China, I had an idea in my head of what it was like, and when I got there, yeah, it held up to an extent, but it was so much more. When I was like, oh, I never thought of this, or I never would have gotten that. So I think that can be said about every country. What would you say?
100%. I lost track as to how many times I've gone to Mexico, but it's around 14, 15 times. Until this day, my parents still tell me, don't go, it's dangerous. Even though I'm the one that goes alone as a female traveler, and they've never gone because they just assume it's whatever they see in the media. And
Yes.
I've experienced nothing but hospitality and kindness when traveling there.
And that's true. I mean, yeah, they certainly are valid because there are parts of Mexico that are dangerous and there are bad things going on there, but that happens in all countries. It's just a matter of how much. So, but as with most places, what you see on the news, the news always seems to make it look worse than it really is. I mean, granted, like what's going on in some places now, I think it's pretty spot on, but generally speaking, from my own experience and what you've just been kind of reinforcing as well, it's never really as bad as it's depicted.
100%.
And it's not like, oh, the whole country's going to heck. Because I remember, for example, when the horrible situation in Ferguson, Missouri, back in 2014 with the shootings. I was in China at the time, and it was front page news in China. And my Chinese friends were like, "Oh, Sean, is St. Louis all is it like a war zone?" I'm like, "No, it's just one area. There's been a few things, but just one area." "Oh, really?" I'm like, "Yeah." So that's a good example of how media can sensationalize
Yeah, that's
things.
just how it is anywhere. There are certain neighborhoods or specific places within the neighborhoods that you just know you should avoid, or you should have a buddy go with you, especially at night. Just common sense.
Exactly, and that we can delve in further when making friends or acquaintances overseas, because those are the people you can get that first-hand information from. But when you're in this city, this is the ins and outs. This is what you do. This is what you don't do. If you're not from there, you're not going to have that background, or at least not more of a ground depiction of it.
Right.
And I think also leads into another thing, which is I think travel is actually one of the best ways you can learn about different places, because you can learn about something in school, high school, college, but it's not the same as actually if you go there. Like I'm a history major. You learn about all these historical events and places around the world, but when you actually go to them, it's like wow, it hits you a little harder, and you realize, oh, this is what happened here. At least that's what I felt in going to some places in Europe and in Asia where I've studied about them in class, but when you actually go there, it's just totally different.
For sure, like if you visit some type of ancient ruins, and you just see the magnitude of what they were able to build without modern tools, you just have a new appreciation for the information that you picked up in high school and college.
Exactly. And another great example was when I was studying in Rome. I studied the Roman Empire and Italian history, but when you're in Rome, it's just like the diversity, all the different periods, the buildings from different periods, from pre-Roman up until the modern. It's just flabbergasting. The mixture of different styles that go back over 2,500 years. It's just like wow. You don't get that in the U.S. most places. Let's face it, most places in the U.S. If they're a few hundred years old, that's pretty much about as far as you're going to go back, unless you find some Native American sites. But and that really brings it more into fruition, and I think it's a bit of a reality check. Like, wow, okay.
And then also, I think you realize what has been left out of the curriculum in the United States too.
Yeah, and especially because I know that you teach, and I think that, and I myself from being in school and and then going and traveling, you can say, oh well, now that I've done this, I have some ideas of how maybe to better present this information, even
Right,
though I'm
or
not.
more accurately
Mhm.
without a bias, maybe.
And I think with any topic or any subject, it's making it fun and interesting, because you can teach something, but if it's taught in a really dull way, people are not really going to find much interest in it. But if it's taught in a more vibrant and engaging way, you're going to get more attention, and the students, no matter what age they are, will find more of an interest and appreciation for it. And then I think moving on to the more practical elements of what you learn when you're traveling abroad is all the skills and other aspects of when you're there, what you have to do, problem solve, adapt. I think that's another big thing. You really learn how to be an adaptable and flexible person, because you meet a lot of people, they're very much set in their ways, no disrespect or anything. They're just set in their ways and they have a way of doing things. And that's great. But when you travel, your way of doing things back in your home country is not always going to apply or work. And if you get upset or frustrated about it, you're kind of out of luck,
And
because
if you
the
are
locals are not going to bend or flex just because you would do it this way and they don't. It's not going to happen.
right, and if you're not willing to adapt, there could be huge cultural differences where you're offending someone, or making a bad impression of your own country. So you have to be quite flexible.
And also, I think you have to be neutral in your mindset and what you think, because yeah, you may see things that offend you. You may experience things that are offensive, or things that you would never do or would never see in your home country. But you have to just realize, you're like, well, I'm in a foreign country. I don't like this or don't agree with it, but I can't really do anything about it.
Right.
I can always, if they ask me for my opinion, or they ask me why you do certain things or this and that, no problem. I'll give my response, but I'm not going to be aggressive. I'm just going to be honest and say, well, yeah, this is how you do things here, but back home, or this is how we do things.
Yeah.
And I've had many conversations with people where they've asked, oh, in America, what, you guys do this or that? Why don't you do this? Why do you do that? And I just answer as to the best of my knowledge and what I know, and had a few cases where they've had some more, let's say, extremist sentiment against, and I'm just trying to say I get it, but this is two different systems, two different ways of doing things, and those situations you just have to be tactful and just realize that you're going to be on the losing end if this gets worse, because you're in their country, not yours.
Exactly.
So that's why having patience and having a thick skin is very important.
Right. And then on the other hand, the other type of skills you develop are more like street smarts. For example, I had never used public transportation until
Mm-hmm.
traveling, and you just have to figure it out and make it happen. Or like learning to read a map. I mean, if you're at home, you don't hardly look at a map because you know how to get around. You've grown up following the same roads. But I mean, they might sound silly, but they're very practical skills that in some cases we might be lacking and learn for the first time.
Oh no, very true. I mean, you learn so much. It's like, yeah, in China, for example, how to take a taxi, how to take the subway, how to get it, how to use it, buy train tickets, plane tickets, all of these skills, especially if you're living there, and if you don't know the language really well, then that can be an additional layer of complexity. So there's all types of skills you learn, and I think the biggest thing is how to plan, be strategic, and how to make the best use of your time and resources. Because if you're going to plan a trip for let's say 2 weeks somewhere, and you're going to travel around, that actually takes a lot of time and preparation. And that's why I definitely recommend for people who are traveling for the first time again, maybe don't do it yourself. Go with a tour, go with an agency, or go with a provider, because they'll take care of all that, and that will allow you to experience everything, and you'll learn about a lot of things that go into it. And then that way, you can plan a trip for yourself. Because the trips I've planned for myself, yes, they've been more time consuming. I have to put more work into them, but I actually get more out of them, and I get more of I'd say, an immersive experience, because I'm actually like living there, because I'm not going with an agency where they take care of everything. I take care of everything myself, and I basically act and go out and be a local.
Right.
And I think, and also it's all like the little small things. It's like, if you're like in China, learn how to eat with chopsticks, learn how learn how to get around with street level Chinese skills, how to do all that. And the same with India, like, okay, what to avoid, or, oh, how to go to this place, or how to interact with people, how to maintain your safety, and
Haggle at the market.
exactly, all of these things. And I think, and it all goes back to, like we mentioned, patience is very important, and just being kind of like, as like the famous Chinese philosopher Lao Tzu said, be like water, be adaptable and flexible.
I like that.
And I agree. It's like, yeah, I'm not sure it works in every situation, but I think when you're traveling, you need to be very flexible, and water is a great metaphor for that.
And then I think you just learn skills like, what's the word I'm looking for? Like daily skills in general that don't necessarily just apply to traveling, like budgeting or organization,
Mm-hmm.
researching.
Oh no, like, how to make sure you have everything for a whole trip in a suitcase. How to make sure you have enough money. Yeah, all these. It's a lot. I think it's all. Yeah, it's being like strategic, and like, and observant.
Yes.
Yeah, I think being observant is very important, and I think you learn a lot about how you govern yourself, and just a lot of practical skills. How to get around, as we mentioned. So I think it just, in a way, it's a challenge. But a lot of people, they think of that. Oh my God, I can't do that. Oh, it's too scary. It's insurmountable. When really, it's not. You just have to take a deep breath and just plan it out. You can't rush this. If you plan it, if you want to go on a trip, you can't just well, you potentially could wing it, but I don't recommend it, especially for some
And even
places.
if you are nervous, you go for it, and it feels so rewarding afterwards to say, "Hey, look what I did."
Exactly. It's just like, doing an obstacle course or exercising. Oh my gosh, I don't think I can do that. Wow, I did it. And you get that endorphin rush that you're like, wow, I did it. And it builds your confidence. I find people who travel, it really boosts their confidence, because it's like, hey, I was able to go here, do all this stuff, and come home in one piece. Not to say that you won't come home in more than one piece, but mentally maybe, because I've had some people I've traveled with where they've just, some of the places we've been, it just mentally was a bit tough for them, just because they weren't, let's just say they had a harder time adapting to the location, or where I to be, and you kind of can see that. And some people, it just, they tend to have a more difficult time with that, but not all. But it's like, you never know until you actually try it.
Right. I think the last point we have is that home is not a building. I think what we mean by that is that whenever you travel, you form like a new little family abroad. You gain friendships. You might gain like a second mom or dad while abroad. A lot of countries are just so hospitable that they just welcome you on in as if you were their own child. And you just realize that home is not the four walls sitting on your property. It's the people around you.
No, that's a great point, and I think that for many people, like, yeah, I mean, I have a home now. I know where I live, but Hangzhou, China, where I lived for 4 years, that's my second home. I still consider it as a home for me, because I spent so much time there, and it's the second longest place I've been in my life. And then some other places as well, I would have no issue going back. And Jenny, the point you bring up is that it's more of a mental idea. What's home, and it can vary for everybody. Some people are very, homebound. Others are less homebound in more of a physical sense. And like you said, some places you go, you can say, wow, I could live here, or I could stay here for a longer period of time, which leads into another topic that we may discuss, and that is the idea of retiring abroad or moving abroad, not just temporarily or short term, but, maybe for long term or even indefinitely. And, but I'm sure that would have to make quite the impression on someone to do that on a dime, but you never know. And yeah, I think, but at the end of the day, you have to find out what works best for you. And if that means, still maintaining kind of more of a traditional sense of what home is in your home country, and in a physical location, that's great. But at the same time, don't limit yourself to that. Just be open-minded and say, well, and honestly, let's face it, go to where you're treated well, and go to where you enjoy. Wouldn't you say?
Yeah.
And then on top of that, I think another thing that kind of makes the whole concept of traveling really fulfilling is the people you meet.
Yes, they can make or break the experience at times. Because there have been times where I've been more on my own, and yeah, I can walk around and take a picture because it looks cool, but it's nice to have a local person to explain stuff or for you to ask questions to.
No, and a great example of that would be when I was in India. I made these. I made two new friends, and who I'm still in touch with, and hopefully, I'm the last I checked, they're still doing okay now because of the situation with COVID in India. But when I was there, we I met them and then we met up the next day, and they took me through all of Old Delhi, and they took me to all these shops and all these alleys and to these markets that I would never have found on my own. And they introduced me to all this good food. I bought a bunch of stuff. They helped me haggle and barter. There was one thing where I was going to buy something, and then I got it for like 50 rupees, and my friend was like, yeah, he would have charged you a lot more if I wasn't here. So I'm like, yeah, point taken right there. And the locals can really help you and make the experience so much better. Because they'll take you off the tourist route. They'll take you to where it's what it's like to be a local or someone who's there. And I found that maintaining those friendships is very important, at least personally speaking, because if you maintain those friendships, even when you go back home, if they want to come visit you, hey, you can do the same thing for them if they come. And if you want to go back there, you can do even more. And let's face it, I mean, having friends in multiple countries can be a very productive and positive thing, wouldn't you say?
Yes, I mean, I've made friends and then I've gone back to the country and I got to stay with them for free, so it helps the budget too.
Hence the practical side of things. Not to be mean. Hey, I'm just
We're
being
not
friends.
using you out there.
Exactly. Not hey. I mean, it's the same thing. If they want to come here, I mean, granted, sure, come stay with me for a couple days if you're traveling through my area on your trip. No problem. But I will say that the friendships are a big thing. And also, outside of just the traveling element, they could be great networking opportunities because, if you, depending on what type of job or what your line of work is, you could potentially benefit from those friendships. I mean, I would say specifically with my line of work, traveling internationally, it's a great thing because I can either meet with them or they may open my eyes or my ears to new opportunities and concepts that you maybe not or maybe would not run into in your home country just because it's a different place, different mindset, and different way of doing things.
Yeah, and for example, me being a Spanish teacher, I can reach back out to my friends in Mexico, and if there's something I wanted to incorporate in my classroom and I forgot the name of it, they can remind me, hey, we went to see this and it was called this, so that I can do more research once I get home. Or maybe they used a vocabulary word that's unique to their region of Mexico that I wasn't familiar with before, and they can help me understand those little nuances.
Oh no, for sure. Honestly, the benefits of having friends, both in your country and from overseas, it's literally limitless. It's what you're willing to put into it because let's face it, maintaining friendships can be challenging and time consuming based on who they are, who you are, and a whole range of factors. But I definitely think it's worth it in the end of the day because just personally speaking, I have friends in Russia, China, India, Mauritania, in West Africa, Italy, Germany, and a whole host of other countries. And yeah, you don't have to talk to them all the time, but just keeping in touch with them, it opens up all these places you can go. And likewise, it's great if they can come visit you. Like if they want to come visit where we are in the U.S., that's great because it's a great time. You can reconnect. And it can create some nice experiences, either if you go there or if they come here. And through that, you can introduce them to more friends, and vice versa. If you go there, you can make even more friends.
And then even if they come visit you in the US, you're still able to learn about their country because as you're teaching them about the US, they'll be comparing and contrasting what they're used to at home.
Exactly, and I will say have been some of the most interesting and eye-opening exchanges. Is when, let's say someone from what country comes to visit, and you either take them to meet with a bunch of your friends or even your family for dinner or for whatever reason, and people just start talking. Oh, why do you do this? Why do you do that? And it just continues, and the mutual curiosity is what I find so interesting.
Yes.
And likewise, if you go there, their friends or family can ask you all this stuff, and I find it really opens people's eyes to like, oh yeah, that's kind of different. Like my one good friend from China, he came to visit me when I was studying as a graduate student, and I remember my family when we visited some of my families in this part of the country, they were just mesmerized by how his life, what he does, how they do things, and it was amazing to watch. Like him talk to them and vice versa. And like, oh, why do you do this? Oh, why do you do that? Or, oh, what's this food? What's that food? Why do you eat this? It was just question after question. And you don't really get that with just people around you here.
Yeah. And you realize you learn a lot about the U.S., even if you're from the U.S., in responding to the questions. Because I recall somebody asking me why we build houses out of wood in the Midwest. Beats me. But I tried to do a little research and help them out.
Yeah, it actually makes you stop and think about things that you just don't even think about because they're so ingrained in your life. Like, oh, why do we do that? It literally, I've had that experience too, and I've done the same thing with them. We're like, yeah, why do we do that? Because for them, it's just so common, it becomes like muscle memory.
Yeah.
No, but I would just say in a nutshell, all these elements are just kind of a very general survey of what it's like to travel abroad and what you learn by traveling abroad. And specifically, as I mentioned earlier, each of these topics can be one whole episode or one whole area that can be delved in deeper and deeper. We could be talking about it for hours, honestly, I'm sure. But we just wanted to kind of give a general depiction today about things you can learn when you travel abroad and the different aspects that can just branch off into so many different directions. And, I just would say I encourage anyone who has the interest or the desire to travel to do so. Don't let your fear hold you back. Don't let being nervous or, oh, I don't think I can adapt. Don't let any of that hold you back because you'll never really know until you actually do it.
Yes. Even don't let your financial situation hold you back. We could do an episode on that as well.
Yeah.
Because it can be more affordable than you think it is.
Oh, yeah, and that's why planning it out yourself can be very useful because generally I find that's a lot cheaper than booking with any agency or tour group because I'll be honest, a lot of them, personally speaking, overcharge for for a lot of places that you can go to.
Yeah.
And also, lastly, don't let your friends or people around you talk you out of it. Because if they've not been there and you're trying to tell me how the place is or don't go, my thing is, well, have you been there? Yeah, they may have watched the news or they may know some things about it, but it's kind of like I don't want to judge or talk about a place in any really sense of like knowledge or a sense of understanding until I've been there. And of course, you can't do that like across the board, but I just think it's before you judge a place or you make a verdict on a place, maybe go there before you do it.
Yes.
I highly recommend doing that.
Thanks again for having me today.
Oh, you're quite welcome, Jenny. It's great to have you on, and we'd like to definitely see and hear more about your other places you've been and your other experiences and stories. Because let's face it, some of the stories I've had when traveling are downright entertaining and crazy, and they're always fun to talk about because sometimes the strangest things can happen when you're traveling that you're like, wow, that I never would have expected that to happen, or and as some episodes I've done with my father from his travels in Asia for business, he's also had some interesting experiences that are kind of like, oh my goodness, that you never would expect. But, well, Jenny, it's great to have you on today, and I'm really glad we were able to kind of get this episode and kind of go into depth about some of the things you learn about traveling abroad. So, like I said, it'd be great to have you on another episode. And for everyone who tuned in today, we really appreciate it. Feel free to let us know what you think of the episode. Any topics or suggestions for things to cover, we are always open to it. So please reach out to us at internationalimmersionpodcast@gmail.com or check us out on social media at International Immersion on Facebook and Instagram with the same name. And with that, we will see you all in the next one. And let's hope the situation with COVID and the internationally will improve so we can get back out there and travel and learn and explore more. And we'll see you all in the next one.